Singapore, Mr. S.R. Nathan, 6th President of the Republic of Singapore, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman, Institute of South Asian Studies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, or ISAS for short, I warmly welcome you to the Institute's 8th Annual International Conference. Today's conference is themed as India-China Cooperation for Global Good. To start off the two-day conference, I now invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of ISAS, to deliver his welcome address. Ambassador, please.
Good morning, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, Emeritus Senior Minister, Singapore, President S.R. Nathan, former President of Singapore, Dr. T.C.A. Rathaman, Ambassador of High Commission of India in Singapore, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Ambassador of India to China, Mr. Zainul Abidin Rashid, former Minister of State, Foreign Affairs, Singapore, Mr. Tony Chu, President of the Singapore Business Federation, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this 8th annual conference of the Institute of South Asian Studies, or ISAS. The annual conference on South Asia is our signature event. This we organize every year, and in the last 7 conferences, our focus has been on issues in South Asia. This year, the focus is on the relationship between the largest country in South Asia and our South Asia's largest neighbor, China. We have chosen the subject, India-China Cooperation for Global Good. Whether the elephant and the dragon tangles, or the panda and the Bengal tiger has a standoff, it has got great repercussions, far-reaching repercussions on the rest of the world. Today's conference follows a fair amount of research done by ISAS on this subject. A fact that emerged during our research is that the 2 largest nations of Asia have insufficient knowledge of each other. And I may add, there is insufficient knowledge between the 2 regions, East Asia and South Asia. It is the hope of ISAS that our research and our various activities with policymakers and scholars in both regions will help to bridge this gap. Earlier this year, ISAS launched a book in New Delhi, which was edited by our director, Professor Tan, and a senior scholar, Professor Winnie. This was called Resurgent China. The launch was done by the Vice President of India, Dr. Ansari, to a packed audience. We have also another scholar, senior scholar, who has written a book called India-China Economics, and this is Challenges, Competition and Collaboration. We also held in Singapore a China-India media workshop, which helped the high decibel media on both sides to sit together and discuss issues in a dispassionate manner. The ambient temperature in Singapore is conducive for such discussions. Needless to say, ISAS has a strong network of partners in India. We are in the process of expanding our partnerships in China. We have signed an MOU with the Fudan University. We are looking forward to more such formal arrangements with reputed Chinese institutions like the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. We will deepen these institutional partnerships by having regular exchange of scholars and researchers. We plan to do the same with institutes in Japan and South Korea. In addition, we are already working together with other reputed institutes elsewhere in the world with similar interests, such as the India-China America Institute of the US, In fact, its executive director, Mr. Professor Govindarajan, is participating in today's event. Another important research project that ISAS has initiated is on South Asia diaspora, which has come bearing on today's conference because of the interest South Asian diaspora has in China. We successfully organized the first South Asian Diaspora Convention, SADC, last year. And this next one will be in November 2013. We are very appreciative of the great deal of assistance and support we get from various agencies of the Singapore government. We expect this to be, next one to be even more successful than the last one, because of the great deal of interest that the diaspora has shown in what we have done so far. In its 8 years of existence, ISAS has tried to raise the awareness of South Asia in Singapore and in the region. I like to believe that we have achieved a small level of success. A major inspiration for what we have achieved is our patron, ESN Mr. Goh Chok Tong, who started the mild India fever when he was Prime Minister. ISAS is delighted that he's agreed to be our guest of honor today and deliver the keynote address. If I may just bring in a personal note, I've had the honor of sharing a platform with Mr. Goh many times in the past. The first time was some 30 odd years, almost 40 years ago, when I was Vice President of an organization called Singapore Manufacturers Association, and I was in charge of an event annually called Singapore Trade Fair, International Fair. We had invited then Finance Minister, Mr. Hon Siu Sen, to inaugurate the fair. I must admit that we were a little disappointed when Mr. Hon Siu Sen decided to send his young deputy instead. However, the towering charm of this young deputy captivated us, and we were very happy that he came. He went on to become Prime Minister, and today he is our guest of honor. Mr. Goh has always urged us, ISAS, not to be just a research institute, but expand the platform. We have taken his advice to heart, and there are several programs that we are planning, which would be of interest, and we will announce them in due course. I need to add one more event that is going to happen tomorrow, and that is the symposium, China-India Relations. The lead address at this symposium will be delivered by Dr. S. Jaishankar, Ambassador of India to China. He used to be the High Commissioner to Singapore some years back. We also have a distinguished panel of commentators providing the expert inputs on the occasion. I hope you will come. It is at the National Library. You will come and support it. I must end with a very special word of thanks to former President Mr. Nadu. He has been a great supporter of ISAS, a mentor and a guide, and we thank him for all his help. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will find the conference useful, and I hope you will have an interesting day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure now to invite Emeritus Senior Minister Goh Chok Tong to deliver the keynote address. ESN, please.
Mr. S. R. Nathan, former President of Singapore, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The Institute of South Asian Studies has chosen the very timely and pertinent theme of this year's conference, India-China Cooperation for Global Good. China and India have awoken from the long economic slumber to become the growth stories of this century. Their relationship will affect all of us in Asia, and indeed the world. I hope that over the next 2 days, you will throw up some strategic and practical ideas for India and China to cooperate for the global good. Let me start by posing some questions. At a time when the world is experiencing strong headwinds, the US fiscal cliff, the Eurozone crisis, and tensions in the Middle East, to name a few, what should we realistically expect from China and India? How do we see the future? Is it one of great promise and abundant opportunities, or one fraught with insurmountable domestic challenges and the risk of conflict with other countries as they grow in power? I'm inclined to believe that China and India would want to focus on economic growth, to lift the living standards of the peoples, rather than pursue external forays which would distract them from this growth. In China, the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party will depend largely on its ability to deliver a better economic livelihood for its people. In India, the ruling parties will be voted out if they fail to do likewise. The transformation of China from the late 1970s and India from the early 1990s has been driven by a confluence of powerful forces, such as geopolitics, globalization, and socio-economic change in both nations. Both are great civilizations that have withstood the ebbs and flows of history. In more recent times, the end of the Cold War and the advent of what American author Thomas Friedman describes as a flat world have catalyzed their resurgence. Both governments made the tough decision to open up their economies and embrace globalization to dramatically transform their countries. However, the results we see today are the product of two very different models of growth. The China model features a socialist market system that promotes strong public spending, state-owned enterprises, massive infrastructure investment, and an export-oriented global manufacturing base. The Indian model features a democratic federal system and an economy powered by domestic consumption, private companies, high-tech manufacturing, and a strong services sector. Each model has its own strengths and weaknesses, but the goals are roughly the same, and the outcomes largely similar. Vast improvements in standards of living, greater social mobility, and better infrastructures. China and India's transformation is still very much work in progress. In that sense, their best years are still ahead of them. The opening up or internationalization of China and India has already benefited the world. It has expanded the global economic pie and increased international trade. In the wake of the 2007-08 financial crisis, the world looked to China and India to provide economic balance. Today, together they account for more than half of global economic growth, and the soft power is felt internationally. China and India's growth is a boon for many countries around the globe. A wider choice of everyday products manufactured in these countries fills our shelves. They are buying commodities, minerals, and manufactured products from all over the world. And air travel has brought more Chinese and Indian tourists to our shores. China and India's rapid growth has also resulted in the rebalancing of the global economy in favor of Asia. Companies and jobs have migrated to Asia, where goods and services can be produced most competitively. China has become known as the factory of the world, and India the back office of the world. But they will not stop at that. As both economies become more developed, we can expect to see more types of jobs move to China and India, while the less competitive ones in these countries may move out to elsewhere. I suspect most of us worry more when China's and India's growth starts to slow than the competitive threat they pose when they are expanding annually at rates of 7.5 to 10.5% on average. The downstream impact on other regional economies, in trade, investments, equity markets, and ultimately employment prospects is far-reaching as our economies are now more linked to those two countries. Indeed, the effects of slowing growth in China and India are already being felt in Singapore. The question is, will China and India continue to grow strongly? My opinion is that they will, at least over the next 20 years, the many grave challenges notwithstanding. They will grow by continuing to move up the value chain. They are still slack in the economies. They are performing nowhere near the full potential. They have a huge talent pool. They can make the technological leap. There will be more mega cities besides Mumbai and Shanghai. Villages are fast becoming suburban centers of economic growth, and many rural areas are still waiting to be developed. The middle class is expanding and becoming more affluent, and this will open the already huge markets. Fox predicts, perhaps a little optimistically in my view, that there could be as many as 2.5 billion Chinese and Indians in the middle class bracket by 2030, compared to 780 million in the US and Western Europe combined. This is not to say that China and India will rise and rise without interruption. They face considerable domestic challenges. Some are already on the horizon and will be common to both. Ensuring inclusive and sustainable growth will be a major preoccupation for many years to come, and eradicating corruption will be an undue task for both. India is at an inflection point. The weight of these problems recently compelled Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to reset India's path with bold new economic reforms. I hope you will not leave his foot off the accelerator. China on its part is also aware of the limitations of its current export-driven model of development. Transitioning to a model that emphasizes sustainable growth and increased domestic consumption will be a key responsibility of the incoming leadership held by President-elect Xi Jinping. I am nonetheless confident that both countries will continue with their economic reforms, not dramatically, but steadily. I visited China and India many times, and have met many of their leaders, senior government officials, and industry captains. They are clear about the scale and degree of difficulty in the challenges that are before them. I remember clearly how Premier Wen Jiabao once explained to me that many accused of China's problems through the concept of division and multiplication. China's wealth and resources, he told me, become very small when divided by 1.3 billion people, while a small problem becomes huge when multiplied by 1.3 billion. Prime Minister Singh also demonstrated a similarly astute understanding of his country's manifold challenges. He has wisely observed that the world is not kind to those who do not tackle their own problems. I don't wish to leave you with the idea that the near simultaneous rise of China and India will continue to progress in a linear fashion or is without any risks or surprises. In fact, their continued rise may even at times be discomforting for us. Let me elaborate. The most obvious risk is that as they continue to forge ahead, the rivalry between the two giants could intensify. Both countries have nuclear weapons states that are rapidly modernizing their armies and air forces. Both are also building up blue water naval fleets. The historical baggage and decrease over long-standing border issues remain. The 1962 Sino-India War still casts a long shadow and continues to bedevil the relationship 50 years on. Thankfully, there has been no major confrontation since. There are those, perhaps even some in this audience, who would argue that despite numerous cooperative elements and similarities in their approach to international issues, China and India are bound or even destined to be strategic adversaries. Such determinism is, I think, misplaced. Competition between rising powers is unavoidable. Conflict is not. Of course, neither side would want to cede any strategic advantage to the other. They will keep the powder dry for all eventualities. But I think we should give due credit to China and India for having coexisted peacefully or trying to bridge their differences over the last few decades. Today, a war across the land borders is much less likely compared to 50 years ago. But there will be occasional blips for sure. The gap between China and India is widening in some respects, narrowing in others. It is a fact that China had a decade-long head start on its economic reforms. But it is equally true that change in China tends to happen more quickly than in India. The Indian system, with its decentralization of power, means that change is uneven, far less swift, and the political consensus is difficult to master. But this is not a race in the finishing line, and India will find its own way to keep pace with China. There's also an element of irony here in that the tandem rise of China and India could unnerve their neighbors. Countries don't say it openly, but giants naturally inspire violence. States know that there's often a price to generosity. Largesse from a titan is never unconditional. Interdependence yields benefits, and is certainly preferred to conflict. But there are also attendant costs and strings attached to cross-border collaboration. Put simply, there's no free lunch in interstate relations. Countries routinely hedge to maximize their political or economic space. But they know that when there is a quarrel, or skirmish, or conflict between two big brothers, they can easily be dragged into the fray or forced to choose sides. Very few governments would want to be in that sort of dilemma. This is why no country in this part of the world wants to see India and China at loggerheads. A peaceful and collaborative relationship between a powerful China and a strong India is ultimately in everyone's interests and to everyone's benefit. And I believe Chinese and Indian leaders know this to be true too. Decades of conscious and careful efforts to maintain cordial ties are already bearing fruit, particularly in the economic sphere. From 1988 to date, trade between China and India jumped from $200 million to more than $55 billion in the first 10 months of this year. Both sides have targeted $100 billion in bilateral trade by 2015. Apart from commerce, the Chinese and Indians share common interests in traditional challenges, such as currency and energy security, non-traditional challenges like cybercrime, food security, and climate change, and safeguarding of global public goods like freedom of navigation. However, the competitive dynamics between China and India will not go away. So the real issue for policymakers is how they can forge cooperation with each other and with others for the mutual benefit and for the global good. Is there scope for them to be engaged in healthy competition, preferably within institutionalized frameworks, so that they can pursue their legitimate interests without destabilizing the international system? There are no easy answers to such questions, but it is clear to me that one of the keys lies with both sides exercising strategic leadership. A new generation is assuming the mantle of leadership in Beijing and New Delhi. Last week, China underwent a once-in-a-decade leadership transition. President-elect Xi Jinping and Premier-elect Li Keqiang are taking over the helm. All eyes will be on who will lead India following the next general elections in 2014, if not earlier. Expectations are for a leader from the younger generation to do so. The new generation of leaders in China and India will face tremendous pressures from all directions. Their political supporters, opposition voices, the grassroots interest groups, NGOs, media, and foreign governments. The trade-offs will be even more difficult to make than those the predecessors faced. To deal with these pressures, leaders will need to transcend national and even local politics. They must not succumb to populist, nationalistic, or xenophobic, and even protectionist compulsions. Here again, let me cite Sino-Indian relations as a case in point. There are many emotive issues involved, and the wounds of the past have not fully healed. But I believe the leaders on both sides are rational. Neither side wants war, nor to be forced into it, because war will set back development and bring the peoples more harm than good. The next generation of leaders in Beijing and New Delhi need therefore to respond creatively and bravely to the imperatives of the changing times. They will have to devise a modus vivendi to deal with the new and complicated problems that will inevitably arise. Otherwise, any miscalculation by either side could have serious or unintended consequences. For example, China's reliance on Middle East oil is rising. About half of China's total crude oil imports come from the Arab world. China will thus continue to develop its blue water capabilities to safeguard its resource supply lines, which will pass through the Indian Ocean. India will naturally not be comfortable with this. As I said earlier, conflict is not inevitable. It can even be preempted. But this will require China and India to discuss sensitive issues in a candid and constructive manner, and to find a way to work together, as well as with other countries. This is because the challenges of our times are often transboundary in nature and concern more than just two parties. China and India will therefore need to partner each other and other countries to shape an international system that can accommodate their own interests as well as those of other countries. This requires strategic leadership on both sides. The reality is that in today's world, China and India cannot afford to be isolationists or unilateralists, neither is yet a superpower. For the foreseeable future, the US will remain as the only superpower. Even if China or India were to become a superpower one day, we will need to collaborate with other countries to solve global problems. The triangular relationship between the US, China, and India is therefore of paramount importance to our region All parties want to be friends, not enemies. Some observers have warned that China could be uneasy with the current upswing in US-India relations, and that India may be part of the so-called US strategy to contain or encircle China. Any rhetoric of containment is, in my opinion, misleading, untenable, and even dangerous, as it fuels mutual suspicion between weak powers. It does not reflect the complexities of the world that we live or operate, or how leaders and governments see things. Personally, I'll be very surprised if a big country like India allowed itself to be used by the US to contain China. The US knows it is not feasible to contain China's rise. India knows that too, and in fact also aspires to rise. India will act according to its own interests, and on some issues, for example climate change, India's interests will dovetail with China's, not the US. A close and enduring partnership between China and India at one level, and at another level between China, India, and other major players like the US, Japan, Europe, Russia, is the best guarantee for global stability. China and India must be an integral part of the broader collective efforts to ensure global security and manage the international economy. They have the wherewithal and should contribute more actively to the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and G20, to name a few. As their economies and international stature grow, we can expect China and India to play a bigger role in international financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank. They will complete the transition from being aid recipients to aid donors, assisting developing countries in LDCs to level up, just as they themselves have done so over these past few decades. The region which stands to benefit most from a collaborative relationship between China and India is arguably Southeast Asia. At the same time, Southeast Asia offers a prime location and multi-sectoral opportunities for China and India to work together and with others, and to enhance mutual understanding between both countries, and, as Ambassador Gopi said earlier, between Northeast Asia and South Asia. Southeast Asia is a natural partner for China and India because of our geographical proximity, cultural affinity, and historical linkages. China and India are already major investors in and key trading partners of the 10 ASEAN countries. They have made a direct and positive contribution to the prosperity of Southeast Asia. Our region is, of course, not a passive beneficiary. ASEAN has also played a big role in integrating China and India into the region over the years. And that has to a certain degree brought about a broader regional stability and sense of community, especially in the past 10 to 15 years. We must not take peace or prosperity for granted. The Indian Ocean, Straits of Malacca, and South China Sea are our common lifeline.